Hi guys, my name is Chinmaya and welcome to Interview with Scientists, episode 4 from The Addictive Brain. Today we have Dr. Jason Shepherd, who is an associate professor in the Department of Neurobiology and holds the John M. Huntsman Presidential Chair at the University of Utah. He obtained his BSc honors at the University of Otago, New Zealand, his PhD at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and postdoctoral training at the MIT. His lab focuses on elucidating how the brain stores information from the molecular level through in vivo neuronal networks and how these processes go awry in neurological disorders. He is also the recipient of numerous prestigious awards, including the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Ben Barres Early Career Acceleration Award, and the NIH Director's Transformative Research Award. He is also an excellent photographer, and you can check out his collection on his Instagram account.
Thanks, Chinmaya.
We welcome you to the Addictive Brain.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Using Instagram for science for a change rather than actual photography.
Yeah.
When I first joined Instagram, it was only about photos and pictures, and
Okay.
certainly changed a lot since then.
Yeah. Change is good. Always.
Well, I don't know. I'm a purist. I've sort of felt like it was great to have that photography community on Instagram, and,
Yes.
and then when Facebook took over, it's now just become another version of Facebook. But I guess it's people have turned it into different ways of communicating and networking. So that's always good.
Yeah. So, can you tell us about your research career?
Yeah, so I guess starting in my undergrad in New Zealand, I was trying to decide between doing medicine and science, or both. And in New Zealand, you have to start straight out of high school, basically, and there's 2 medical schools. So I started out doing medical school, the sort of like a pre-med, concentrated pre-med thing. And I had one elective my first semester, and I decided that I would do neuropsychology.
Okay.
And I did that, and then after doing that one elective, I decided, I just wanted to learn how the brain works, and swapped my major into neuroscience. So we actually were one of the few universities at the time that offered a neuroscience major in Australasia.
Okay.
And yeah, so then after a 3-year bachelor's, if you want to do a PhD, you end up doing an honors degree, so like an extra year, and you can do a thesis. And I wrangled an exchange agreement with the University of California, so I ended up going to UC Irvine.
Okay.
And essentially, like, started out doing their first year PhD program, and working in a lab. So I ended up working in Frank Lafeur's lab, who had just developed this new animal model of Alzheimer's disease, this triple transgenic.
Yeah.
And I did some electrophysiology experiments on those mice. But being in America allowed me to start my graduate career in America as well. So I applied to grad school, even though I also had a fellowship at Cambridge in England. And so then decided to go to Hopkins for grad school. And Hopkins was an amazing place to do neuroscience, and especially molecular neuroscience, which is what I became really interested in.
Thanks.
And worked with Paul Worley and Rick Hugan there to look at the molecular mechanisms of synaptic plasticity. So we know that the way memory works and how other forms of learning that occur in the brain, we think that it starts off with a whole set of genes that get turned on when you learn.
Yes.
And those genes, those proteins that are encoded by the genes, then act in different ways.
Okay.
And one thing is to change the strength of the connections between neurons, so synapses,
Yes.
where a specific set of cells in the brain then get strengthened together, and now you have a circuit that mediates that particular memory or experience that you're undergoing. So every time we learn, there's these structural changes in synapses that connect the network that restores ultimately the information in that specific circuit. But there's lots of things that we don't know, and so one of the key questions is those genes that get turned on. What are they doing? Why are they important?
Yeah.
Which genes are important?
Yes.
And so we settled on this one gene called ARC, and I've ended up working on the same genes pretty much my whole career.
Okay.
And it's it's really interesting because this gene, it's not normally expressed in the brain very highly until you learn, and then it gets turned on. You get transcription in response to experience, and so that's transcription, of course, is when DNA gets turned on.
Yes.
To make messenger RNA.
Yeah.
And another interesting thing about ARC was that they had found that the messenger RNA, which usually gets translated into protein,
Yes.
Actually traffics out into those active dendrites near synapses. And it was one of the first examples of this messenger RNA trafficking all the way out and then getting translated.
Okay.
So lots of different points of regulation, and so that meant that maybe it's important for something in the context of memory. And so if you take out the gene, so in mice we can put in genes, take out genes. Mice that lack ARC basically end up not being able to remember anything. So they can learn, and there's short-term memory, so working memory seems to be okay. Yeah. And for the most part, the brain's wired up normally. But you come back a day later, and there's no evidence or little evidence that they have consolidated that information.
Okay. So why did you decide to work on ARC? What led to that?
Yeah, so it was funny because I actually wrote a undergrad essay on ARC, and at the time, again, there was sort of a lot of interest in which genes were being turned on with learning, and this observation that the RNA gets trafficked out really fascinated me, and I was trying to figure out, I was like, oh, well, it'd be cool to figure out why it's doing this. What is it actually? What is its molecular function at synapses? So yeah, I sort of landed on this gene, that way back in undergrad, and of course I didn't think that I would end up working on it for the rest of my career, but yeah.
That's nice. So I have been reading a lot of your posts about COVID-19, the virus. It's really encouraging, like how you communicate the right thing about COVID-19. So can you tell us more about the molecular, the mechanism of action and the structure of COVID-19?
Yeah, well, look, before I get to that, though, I'll just say that, the most recent work in my lab has, we're still working on ARC, but we made this really interesting discovery that the ARC protein is able to form something that looks like viral capsids.
Yes.
So all viruses almost have a protein shell that protects the viral genomic information, so usually RNA or DNA. Of course, here we're studying a neuronal gene that's being made in our brains, and now we think it's making something that looks like a virus.
Yeah.
So very surprising, and we're still not exactly sure why it's doing that. But the other implication was that this gene actually was, evolved from something that looked like a virus, a retrotransposon, And so what it turns out is that there's these sequences in our DNA even. In fact, half the sequences in human genome look like viruses.
Okay.
Or they came from some sort of viral element or transposable element.
Yeah.
And so evolution can use these sequences to make new genes. And but the long story short here is that this is, taken my lab into domains that that I don't have expertise in. I had to learn, like virology.
Yes.
So then so sort of became an amateur virologist.
Yeah.
And then COVID-19 came in, and in terms of timing wise, so it was I felt like, okay, I know more about viruses now than I used to.
Yes.
And so coronaviruses, which is what COVID-19 is, and this family of viruses are not like retroviruses, like HIV, which is what we were looking at. But there's a lot of similarities. It's an RNA virus, and so that means its genomic material is encoded by RNA. There's a capsid structure and encloses that RNA. And then there's a membrane around the capsid. So there's like a balloon around a soccer ball.
Okay.
And on the balloon are these membrane proteins that stick out.
Yeah.
And in one in particular, it's called the spike protein.
Yeah.
And so it's basically a soccer ball with a membrane with spikes. And the reason why it's called coronavirus, the corona, is because it looks like, it's got a halo or a crown when you look under a microscope.
Okay.
And so COVID-19 is caused by a novel coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2.
Yeah.
And, it's because it's a virus that humans have not really been exposed to before. We think it's jumped from an animal host, probably a bat.
Okay.
We don't have any immune defenses against the virus.
Yes.
And so that's what's causing this pandemic, is that we don't have general immunity, and in some cases it's causing severe illness and death.
Yes. So yeah. So COVID-19, as we know, is really harmful. It is causing a lot of deaths and infections at this point. And the CDC and WHO have advised people to wear masks to control the spread of infection. But the public is divided on mask wearing, as you know. So some say it is important while others deny that. What do you think? Why do you think wearing a mask is important right now?
Yeah, so, along with the fact that this was a new virus to humans, scientists didn't know much about it. But what we do know, or even knew early on, was that most likely it was spread through the air, that either it was being, released from infected people in these droplets in the air, or the droplets would then fall on surfaces and then contaminate surfaces.
Yeah.
And so, of course, we didn't really know what was the most important the road for infection.
Yeah.
And as we find out more information, it turns out that most likely the most infections occur through spread from breathing in air that's contaminated. And so social distancing and mask wearing, of course, help prevent that kind of infection, because if you're not standing close to someone who's infected, if you're not breathing in their air, then you're safer. And then the mask acts as a barrier, of course, and stops those droplets that can be very small from being inhaled.
Yes.
And you can think about it, it's like if you see someone singing and there's light behind them, you can see all those droplets being spread. And if someone's shouting or talking loud, it's the same thing. So it's sort of hard for me to understand why people don't want to wear masks, it seems like it's obvious that if a virus is spread through droplets in the air,
Yeah.
you don't want to breathe them in.
Yes.
Or you don't want to breathe them out and infect other people. And of course, one of the problems initially was that there was mixed messages from the CDC and other experts about mask wearing, and part of that was because masks were at a premium. People couldn't get the real good filtered masks like N95s.
Yes.
And so there was this idea, of course, that the health workers should be wearing these, and that's very true. But there was this, confusion in that the health workers were obviously needing these masks because they were right in the action there. They were going to be exposed to infected people.
Yeah.
So the filtered masks prevent the droplets from completely getting in, so they're not going to inhale them.
Yeah.
Whereas the cloth masks, right, the ones that are homemade, or now everyone's selling them, for the most part, there's no filter, so they're not going to filter the infected particles, but they are going to stop you from spreading the virus if you are infected. So that's sort of a turnaround, right? Instead of thinking, okay, well, I'm going to wear a mask to protect myself, I'm going to wear a mask to protect others. I'm not going to infect them.
Yeah.
And so that's, and that kind of mixed messaging, I think, was confusing, but it didn't take that long for, I think the first sort of real messages to stop wearing masks came in April and May. And the fact that we're still arguing about this is just ridiculous. And the other thing is that, what we also found out was many people could be infected with the virus and not show many symptoms or even no symptoms. So they didn't know that they were infected, and so they would just go out there and do their thing, and they could pass it on without knowing.
Yeah.
So again, if you're out in public and you are going to be within 6 feet of people, just wear a mask, and it's to protect others, even if you don't think you're infected or all that. So, and I think again, in America at least, this whole situation has been very politicized, and there's sides been taken, and there's the scientists who are trying to say, look, we don't care about the politics. This is a public health issue.
Yes.
And listen to the experts like Dr. Fauci, who don't care about whether the Republicans win or Trump wins or whatever.
Yes.
And so that's where, again, there's a lot of misinformation that the politicians are spreading, including Trump. And, the irony is, like, look what happened this week. Look what happened today.
Yes. Yesterday.
Our president has COVID, and, they were mocking people for wearing masks. They refused to wear masks at events.
Yes.
Now we've got senators and the president are infected, and unfortunately, biology, nature, viruses, they don't give a shit about politics either.
Yes. So a lot of COVID vaccines are being manufactured, like in development all over the world, and almost all of them are being fast-tracked. But we know that vaccine development takes years. So, like COVID vaccine, can other vaccines be fast-tracked too?
Yeah, no, so I think one of the positives that have come out of this whole mess is that the pace of science in both understanding COVID-19, the virus, and treating the virus have been amazing. And but from the outside, the public are now seeing how science works, and science is not magic. It's not like we land on the right answer right away unless we're super lucky.
Yes.
And it's a process. It's a process of doing experiments, seeing what's wrong, seeing what's right, refining the ideas, and then you get closer to what's really truly happening, right?
Yes.
So with the vaccines, there's like over 100 different vaccines in development for the same virus. Now that's unprecedented, right? That's never happened. We've never had every single biotech company, pharmaceutical company looking at the same or trying to develop the same kind of vaccine.
Yes.
So the good thing there is like you've got lots of shots on goal, more shots on goal than you'd ever have before.
Yes.
And a lot of the vaccine development is based on successful vaccines that may have taken a long time to develop, but we've got all that information and knowledge of how to do it. So the real sort of concern though is that we don't want to rush it. You don't want to give a therapy to millions of people without making sure it's safe and also making sure that it works.
Yes.
And so, so some of these vaccines are in the phase 3 of clinical trials, which is the final phase, but it's a phase where you do administer the therapy or vaccine to thousands of people. And then you monitor how safe it is, are there adverse reactions? And then you also, of course, have specific milestones of efficacy that need to be evaluated.
Yes.
And the way those trials work is that there's usually these independent organizations that monitor the trials, that make sure that they're being run in a conflict, no conflict of interest way. And there's normally processes in place also by the FDA that that the FDA decides whether this is a drug that will, or vaccine that will go on the market.
Yes.
So there are all those rules, and some of them are being accelerated, or there's evaluation of therapies that are given, for example, emergency authorization, because we're in a mess, right? We need something. Yes. So I guess that's all to say. That I'm optimistic that we will have a vaccine that's going to work.
Yes.
I don't think we're going to have it before the end of the year, or anywhere close to the election. So that that is just total fabrication. And even if we have something, or even if we know that it works, a vaccine works in one of these phase 3 trials, there's the issue of production, right? If you're going to have to get this to millions of people, billions of people, and so that's another big issue, is that even if we know it works, we still have to get it to people. They have to be administered. And then the final thing is that people have to take it. Yeah. Because, vaccines work through this process called herd immunity, which I'm sure, a lot of people have been, heard in various ways. Yes. And what's herd immunity? And that is essentially getting everyone immunized to the virus, but in a safe way. So, our immune systems act also as a kind of memory. They know what pathogens, what bacteria, what viruses we've encountered through our lives. And so when you get exposed to some of these viruses again, your immune system's primed to set off defense mechanisms that kill the virus right away if everything is working. Yes. But in order to have that memory, those rapid defenses, you need to have mounted your immune response to the virus in the first place. Yes. And sometimes people don't have good immune systems, or they're unable to do that, or in some cases, of course, you get very sick. Yes. And of course, no one wants that. No one really wants that. Yes. And what then becomes safe to encounter the virus again. Yes. And so vaccines accelerate herd immunity by basically turning on your immune system, mimicking the virus, and then allowing you to mount an immune response, but without getting sick. Yes. Right? And so then that stops transmission of the virus. And that's what we want to do, is stop transmission of the virus. And so the more people that are immunized, that get the vaccine, the more
Yes.
likely we're going to be able to stop transmission and basically, halt the pandemic. And that's,
Yeah.
I think everyone would love that.
Yes.
So I'm hoping that once we have a vaccine, that the public trust that it's going to work. And so that's the other worry, is that if they rush things through the system and they end up being issues with, how well it works or safety, we're
Yes.
going to further erode this idea that vaccines are not safe, which is completely not true.
Yes. Because we have anti-vaccine movements as well.
Right. Right.
So, talking about vaccines, the Russia Sputnik vaccine came out of nowhere. It was a surprise for me. So, what do you think? How effective is it?
So from what I know about that particular vaccine, it's based on technology and approaches that others are using. So I believe it's based on this viral vector approach. It's AAV approach, where you use a modified virus that doesn't cause any toxicity, and it'll basically either bring in DNA or RNA into cells that would mimic what the coronavirus looks like.
Yes.
So in principle, it sounds like it's a good, way to do it. But of course, the problem is that we don't know they claim that it's safe, and they've done phase 1 and 2 trials, and that's good enough for them. So they're going to start giving it to people.
Yes.
And so they're bypassing that phase 3 trial, which is where you give it to thousands of more people. And of course, that's when you get to see if there are rare adverse reactions that could make it not safe for a few people. So if anyone offers you the Russian vaccine, do not take it.
So, my last question would be, do you think science is communicated properly to the public at this point, or at any point?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some people and some scientists and some science journalists that are doing a great job right now.
Yeah.
And, I think the problem isn't so much that scientists and science journalism are not doing their job properly. It's that they are getting, they're getting hindered by politicians and social media, Facebook, all these other sites or platforms that disseminate misinformation.
Yes.
And so the public then themselves will spread misinformation based on their own their own bias of what they believe. And so the real problem is, who do we trust? Like, what kind of information should scientists be giving out there? And how do we do that in a way where we create trust for the experts that have trained for decades, like Fauci, where, they know what they're talking about.
Yes.
They've spent their whole lives trying to defend the public against viruses. But he was involved in in HIV research.
Yes.
So, I think there's a lot of challenges for scientists right now because of that there's so much misinformation, and misinformation for whatever reason seems to spread like 10 times faster than the real information. And so I see it actually as a war on information itself, that we are in an unprecedented time where we have access to all this information, but we also have access to all this misinformation. And I think if we don't know how to, figure out what information we trust and what information we shouldn't trust, we're in big trouble. So, and so what are the solutions? I think some of the solutions are that the platforms themselves, like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, put in, procedures that allow the experts to have a voice and to say, look, that's not right. You should take that down. This is why you should take it down. That's a start, I think. And I think, of course, science and information should not be politicized. in a way where it's misused. So of course, you know, science is political. It's always going to be political because humans are political beings. But most scientists that I know that are doing research are not doing research to for a political agenda, right? They're just doing research either to solve a problem or to actually help people. And so I would say for the most part, even though scientists, I have my own political opinions, that does not influence the science. At least in my case, I feel like it doesn't influence my science. So there's that. And I think, you know, and I do think that most scientists that are doing science don't necessarily have the motivation or time to spend to, you know, communicate their science. And I think that's that can be a mistake. I think all of us should be trying to do that in some way or other. And, you know, whether it's through live on Instagram or podcasts or, you know, opinion pieces in the local newspaper, all of those I think can help.
Yes.
And if we all sort of, you know, stand out and say, look, this is the science, wear a mask, social distance. I think, you know, we'll get through this pandemic, but yeah, it's right now it's not looking great.
That's true. Well, we thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate you came over on Instagram and talked to us.
Yeah, no problem.
And your audience who joined us.